The COVID-19 lockdowns, a period of unprecedented global stagnation, had driven many to the edge of sanity. For me, a single man cooped up in Suffolk County, Long Island, it meant endless hours on Tinder, diming strangers, and binge-watching shows. It was a monotonous existence, punctuated only by the occasional digital spark. That's how I reconnected with Sophia, or Soph as she preferred, an acquaintance from Instagram whose rebellious spirit had always intrigued me. She lived a convenient 5 minutes away, a detail that would soon plunge us into a night of unexpected terror. We met up on a Tuesday night, escaping the confines of our homes for a drive to a nearby park, closed and deserted. Under the shroud of twilight, we sipped White Claws, the bubbly sweetness, a sharp contrast to the creeping boredom of lockdown life. Soph, with her easy smile and adventurous glint in her eyes, immediately lived up to her reputation. She was the kind of person who'd casually suggest hopping fences or trespassing, and in the stifling monotony of that summer, her daring was a welcome jolt. Within an hour, a mutual connection sparked, and she proposed an idea that, in retrospect, should have sent shivers down my spine: a drive out to Montauk Point, to walk the cliffwalk around the lighthouse. The grounds were technically closed after sunset, probably even during lockdown, but Soph, with an almost reckless confidence, assured me there would be no security. I was game for an adventure, and the allure of the legendary Montauk Lighthouse at night was too strong to resist. We finished our drinks and drove east, the familiar coastal roads morphing into something more desolate as we neared the end of Long Island. When we arrived at Montauk Point, the lighthouse parking lot was, as Soph predicted, utterly deserted. Still, a nervous flutter stirred in my stomach. "Are you sure about this?" I asked, my voice a whisper in the vast stillness. "Relax," she'd said, her voice brimming with a confident nonchalance. "I've done this before. No one cares." I took her word for it, parked the car, and we nursed another White Claw, my eyes constantly scanning the empty lot for any sign of a security vehicle. The air was cool, salty, and strangely charged, a precursor, though I didn't know it then, to the unsettling events that would soon unfold. As we walked towards the lighthouse, its towering form loomed against the darkening sky, a solitary sentinel, bathed in its own sweeping light. There was something undeniably majestic about it, yet also deeply eerie, the constant rotation of its powerful beam, illuminating the craggy coastline in fleeting bursts, cast long distorted shadows that danced and writhed, lending the landscape an almost surreal liminal quality. Soph led the way, opting for a path slightly off the main entrance, a strategic maneuver to avoid exposing ourselves directly to the bright lights. It was my first time at Montauk Lighthouse, and the sheer scale of it, even in the dim light, was impressive. Our destination was the cliffside behind the lighthouse, where a rough trail of rocks, known as the cliffwalk, promised breathtaking views. We relied solely on our phone flashlights, the lighthouse's own powerful beam providing only intermittent, disorienting flashes. Most of the other lights on the grounds were off, contributing to the unsettling atmosphere. We carefully picked our way along the rocky path, the rhythmic crash of waves against the cliffs below a constant, mesmerizing backdrop. Then Soph, who had fallen in behind me, whispered my name. I turned, and her flashlight beam cut through the gloom, illuminating a figure behind her, also on the rocks. Both of our lights converged on him, revealing a man in a dark hooded coat. He appeared to be a black man, but his features were obscured by the shadows and the deep hood pulled low over his face. He stood unnervingly still, a silent, imposing silhouette against the churning sea. "Excuse me," I called out, trying to project a confident, authoritative tone. "Do you work here?" There was no response, no movement, just that unnerving stillness. My nervousness escalated. "We're just leaving," I added quickly, a desperate attempt to diffuse any potential confrontation. I fully expected him to be a security guard, ready to scold us for trespassing. Then, a voice, deep and gravelly, broke the silence. "Y'all want to buy some coke?" The words hung in the salty air, a sudden, jarring shift from nervous apprehension to outright alarm. This wasn't a security guard, this was something far more sinister. Why was he here? Why was he following us? My mind raced, trying to process this bizarre and terrifying encounter. "No, man, we're good," I stammered, motioning for Soph to keep moving. I let her go in front, urging her forward with a slight push. That as we quickened our pace along the cliffwalk, the hooded figure started to move too. He didn't press us further about the drugs, he simply followed, maintaining the same unnerving distance, a silent, predatory shadow. Every few minutes, Soph or I would glance back, our flashlights cutting through the darkness, only to find him still there, a constant, unsettling presence. The majestic beauty of the lighthouse and the raw power of the ocean receded, replaced by a suffocating sense of dread. The entire experience became a tense, heart-pounding race against an unknown threat. We finally reached the end of the cliffwalk, scrambling through the sparse grass towards the distant glimmer of my car. The man was still behind us, matching our speed, a relentless pursuit. Then, his voice carried across the night, a chilling question. "Where are you going?" His tone was flat, devoid of emotion, yet laced with an undeniable menace. This wasn't a casual inquiry, it was a veiled threat. He was looking for trouble, and I wanted no part of it. "Don't answer him," I hissed to Soph, pulling her closer. We walked side by side, our pace bordering on a run, our hearts hammering against our ribs. Then, two more figures emerged from the darkness behind the first. My blood ran cold, three of them now, converging on us from the shadows. I resisted, the urge to break into a full sprint, knowing it would only invite a chase. One of the new figures called out something I couldn't quite discern, but the predatory tone was unmistakable. We reached the car, fumbling with the doors, our movements jerky with adrenaline. As we scrambled inside, Soph and I let out simultaneous screams. The three figures were now right on top of the car, their dark forms filling the windows, their faces still obscured by shadow. I slammed the lock button, a split second before two of them tried the door handles. My hands trembled as I threw the car into reverse, the only direction that wouldn't involve potentially hitting any of them. They kicked and pounded on the car as I backed out, the sickening thuds echoing in the confined space. Once the car was in motion, they didn't bother to chase. We sped away, leaving the silent, menacing figures swallowed by the darkness of Montauk Point. The drive back to Suffolk County was a blur of adrenaline and disbelief. Our hearts gradually slowed, replaced by a profound, unsettling quiet. We barely spoke, the unspoken terror hanging heavy between us. I dropped Soph off and we called it a night, the unspoken understanding that we had narrowly escaped something truly terrifying. We continued to see each other after that night, and are still in touch today. But the memory of the Montauk Phantom and the chilling realization of how close we came to something truly horrific still unsettles me to my core. My friends theorize it was a gang, perhaps the Crips, looking for an easy target. Whatever it was, the experience had permanently etched a warning into my soul. I would never again venture out to Montauk Point at night. The allure of adventure had almost cost us everything. My name is Gregory, and I've heard countless tales from my old friend Ian over the years, a man whose life had unfolded on the raw, unforgiving canvas of the sea. Ian was a man forged from salt air and hard labor, 50-something, with a solid build and weathered skin that spoke of decades spent battling the elements. He specialized in marine salvage and coastal infrastructure. If something broke near the water, Ian was the man you called, but he was more than a contractor. He was a diver, a ship technician, even a government inspector of remote installations. The man had seen everything, or so I thought, until he recounted the story of the decommissioned lighthouse. When he told me this tale, a chill that had nothing to do with the temperature settled in my bones. I didn't doubt him for a second. It was 2013 when a small county in Washington state hired Ian for a structural inspection of an old abandoned lighthouse. The county had inherited the property years ago, a white elephant of a building that sparked endless debates between developers who wanted to demolish it and historians who sought to preserve it, with neither willing to shoulder the financial burden. Ian's mission was simple: go there alone, assess the lighthouse inside and out, and determine if restoration was even a viable option. The lighthouse sat on a remote rock island, barely 300 feet wide, an hour's boat ride from the mainland. It was nothing more than a hunk of stone and dirt crowned by the lighthouse, a dilapidated generator shed, and rusted scaffolding, remnants of a forgotten era. It hadn't been used in years, and certainly wasn't a tourist destination. There were no docks, just a precarious ledge where a small Coast Guard boat could offload someone at high tide. Ian, a seasoned veteran of such isolated assignments, packed light for days of food, a sleeping bag, his tools, a clipboard, and a two-way marine radio. The plan was routine: drop off Monday morning, full walkthrough by Wednesday, call for pickup Thursday afternoon. He didn't think twice about going alone. He'd done it dozens of times before. His arrival on the island was marked by an eerie quiet. The weather was cold, cloudy, but strangely calm. The air was a familiar cocktail of salt, metal, and the heavy scent of decay, the unmistakable aroma of abandonment. The lighthouse itself was a formidable structure, some 50 feet tall, built in the early 1900s. Inside, classic spiral staircase wound its way up to the beacon room, its massive glass lens having been dark for decades. Despite its age, the structure felt remarkably solid. Ian conducted his usual safety checks: support beams, stair integrity, window fittings. The floorboards on the lower level were warped but stable. The second floor, a storage room, was empty, save for some rusted metal cabinets. The third floor held a tiny sleeping quarter, undisturbed for decades. He decided to set up his sleeping bag on the ground floor, near the generator room, where it was marginally warmer and sheltered from the wind. The first night was uneventful, yet profoundly unsettling. It was too quiet, Ian later recounted. The absence of sound was more profound than any noise. No birds, no insects, not even the comforting rush of waves against the rocks, just the soft, almost imperceptible whisper of the wind. It was a silence that pressed in, a void that seemed to swallow all sound, leaving him acutely aware of his own heartbeat. On the second day, a thick, impenetrable fog rolled in, transforming the world into a canvas of pure white. Ian awoke to a world where visibility was reduced to 5 feet, the fog so dense it appeared solid, like an alabaster wall. He'd seen heavy fog before, but this was different, a palpable entity that seemed to absorb light and sound. He spent most of the day meticulously taking notes on the upper stairwell, diligently documenting the lighthouse's decay. That's when he noticed the first deviation from the expected. Halfway up the staircase to the beacon room, a small maintenance closet was built into the wall. He had tried to open it on day one, but the hinges were so corroded that it wouldn't budge. Now, it was open a crack, perhaps an inch, but undeniably moved. He rationalized it, blaming the moisture in the air for expanding the old wood, causing it to shift. But a prickle of unease lingered. The inside of the closet was a cavern of pitch black. When he pushed the door wider, his flashlight beam revealed something sitting in the far corner, a wooden box, about the size of a lunchbox, covered in damp moss, as if it had recently been submerged. He didn't open it. He simply shut the door. The unsettling image of the moss-covered box seared into his mind, and made a mental note to report it. That night, he was woken not by a sound, but by the absence of sound, an even deeper, more profound silence than before. Then, he heard them. Footsteps on the metal stairs above him, the distinct clang of heavy boots on rusted iron. At first, he thought an animal had somehow gotten inside, a rat, perhaps, or a stray bird. But then, he realized they weren't descending. The steps were going upward. Whatever was in the tower was climbing towards the beacon room. He grabbed his flashlight, his heart pounding a frantic rhythm against his ribs, and stared at the stairwell entrance, waiting, his breath held captive in his lungs. Nothing. Eventually, the footsteps stopped, and the suffocating silence returned. The next day, a desperate search ensued. He scoured the entire lighthouse, top to bottom, every room, every hidden nook. He even climbed onto the roof, the fog still thick and unencompassing, but found nothing. No animals, no signs of forced entry, nothing out of the ordinary. Nothing, that is, except the box that was no longer in the closet. It now sat brazenly outside, halfway into the stairwell, still covered in its eerie green moss. Ian stood there for a long time, staring at the object, a deep sense of dread coiling in his gut. What was it, and how had it moved? Eventually, with a surge of morbid curiosity mixed with a pragmatic need to understand, he picked it up. It was heavier than it looked, the wood bloated with moisture, but the lid was stubbornly nailed shut. He decided against forcing it open, a primal instinct warning him against disturbing whatever lay within. He left it at the base of the stairs and stumbled outside for air, needing to clear his head. That's when he noticed something else, something that made the hair on his arms stand on end. Footprints in the damp dirt around the lighthouse. Bare footprints, not boots, not shoes, but unmistakable impressions of bare, wet feet. They led from the north side of the building, across the rocky ground, directly towards the cliff edge. And then they stopped. They didn't circle back, just 10 or 12 barefoot impressions in the mud that ended abruptly at a sheer, vertical drop into the churning sea below. Ian stood there, transfixed, his mind desperately trying to rationalize the impossible. Had someone come ashore, but his boat was the only one scheduled for days, and his return pickup wasn't for another 24 hours. He considered using the radio to call for an early extraction, but the fog was so dense, so all-consuming that he knew navigation would be impossible. He was trapped. He went back inside, locking every door and hatch, his movements frantic, almost desperate. He then wedged the stairwell shut with a heavy iron pipe, a meager barrier against the unseen. He tried to sleep. That night was a descent into pure, unadulterated terror. Around 1:30 a.m., a violent slam echoed through the lighthouse, the sound of the upper beacon room door being forced shut with tremendous force. Dust rained down from the ceiling, a silent testament to the impact. Then came the knocking. 3 slow, deliberate knocks on the inside wall of the tower. Not the front door, not a window. The wall itself, as if someone stood inches behind the plaster, tapping their knuckles against the brick. Knock, knock, knock. Each sound was a hammer blow to Ian's sanity. He didn't move. He lay there, paralyzed by a primal fear, until the knocking stopped, replaced by a silence that was far more terrifying than the sounds that had preceded it. When the first hesitant rays of dawn finally pierced the dense fog, Ian scrambled to his feet. He checked everything again. The box was gone. The closet door was now fully, eerily open. At this point, there was no denying it. He was not alone on this island. A cold, hard certainty settled in his mind. He was sharing this desolate, the space with something profoundly unsettling. He grabbed the marine radio, his hands trembling, and called for immediate extraction, fabricating a story about a medical issue to ensure a prompt response. The fog, however, refused to relent. In fact, it seemed to thicken, a suffocating shroud that clung to the island. He waited by the landing ledge for nearly 7 agonizing hours, unable to see more than a few feet in front of him. the sun slowly sinking below the horizon. The air grew colder, the silence heavier. Then he heard it again, footsteps. This time, on the gravel near the base of the lighthouse, walking behind him. He spun around, his heart leaping into his throat, but there was no one there. Or perhaps, the fog was simply too thick, too all-encompassing to reveal their presence. A wave of raw, unadulterated terror washed over him. He ran to the very edge of the cliff, seeking the desperate solace of open air, and stayed there until he heard the glorious life-affirming sound of a boat horn in the distance. They pulled him out just after dark. The deckhand who helped him on board took one look at his ashen face and asked, "What's wrong, mate? You look like you've seen a ghost." Ian, still reeling from the ordeal, simply stated that the lighthouse was unsafe and needed to be sealed off. Back at the office, he filed a brief, concise report, stating only that the structure was compromised and unfit for entry. He never mentioned the footsteps, the knocking, or the mysterious box. He genuinely considered the terrifying possibility that his mind, pushed to the brink by isolation and the oppressive atmosphere of the island, had simply broken. This was the end of Ian's written account. He never went back to that lighthouse. He wrapped up his remaining projects that year, quietly phasing himself out of fieldwork, and within a year stopped taking contracts altogether. He said he wanted to focus on dry land from then on. When I pressed him, just once, about the lighthouse, he merely shrugged, his eyes distant. "Seen enough out there," he mumbled. I pushed him further, asking what he really thought had happened on that island. He looked me dead in the eye, his gaze unwavering, and said something that has haunted me ever since. "Some places are meant to be left alone. They just need time and silence." And that was all he would say. I tried to investigate the lighthouse myself a while back, but I found nothing. The coordinates Ian had scribbled in his notes pointed to no listed structure. County records mentioned a decommissioned tower somewhere off the coast, but there was no official name, no accessible history. It was as if the lighthouse, and the horrors within, had never truly existed. And that, more than anything, Ian said, is what truly unsettles me. Not what he experienced, but the profound silence surrounding it, the utter lack of any other record. I honestly don't know whether I hope Ian was merely losing his mind on that island, or if something truly inexplicable, truly ancient, lay waiting in the decommissioned darkness of Whisper Isle. Nate, a Coast Guard veteran with a decade of service under his belt, was the epitome of grounded practicality. He wasn't one for ghost stories or ancient curses. His world revolved around the stark realities of the ocean, the reliable hum of machinery, and the unwavering protocols of the Coast Guard. So when he recounted the events of his 2-week maintenance rotation on Matinicus Rock in the summer of 2022, his voice, usually steady and calm, carried an undertone of profound disturbance that sent shivers down my spine. This wasn't some exaggerated tale. It was a memory etched into his very being, a chilling testament to something inexplicable that had transpired in that remote, unforgiving place back in 2017. Matinicus Rock was less an island and more a teeth-like protrusion of jagged stone off the coast of Maine, crowned by a solitary lighthouse and a small auxiliary building. There was no power grid, no plumbing, and cell service was a ghost of a whisper in the wind. The lighthouse itself, automated for the most part, still demanded human attention for its yearly upkeep. Typically it was a solo gig, a 2-week stretch of monotonous solitude. But persistent electrical failures the previous year had prompted the Coast Guard to send a pair, Nate and a younger, more impressionable recruit named Russell. The initial days unfolded in a predictable rhythm of work and quiet. They'd meticulously inspect the beacon, test emergency batteries, top off the diesel generator, and laboriously scrape away the relentless salt corrosion that threatened to consume the metal interior. Nights were a silent tableau of simple meals, worn books, and the rhythmic slap of cards. It was isolated, yes, but predictably so. No red flags waved in the stark Maine wind. The ocean, their constant companion, sang its ancient lullaby, a sound Nate had always found comforting. But on the 4th night, the silence shifted. Nate awoke with a visceral sense of unease, a weight in the air that pressed down on him, not unlike the oppressive stillness before a violent thunderstorm. Yet, outside, the sky was a clear, star-dusted canvas. He sat up, the darkness thick and suffocating. Then he noticed it, or rather, the absence of it. The rhythmic sweep of the beacon was gone. The lighthouse, a sentinel of safety for mariners, was dark. A cold knot tightened in his stomach. A beacon failure, especially an unscheduled one, was a serious breach, a potentially catastrophic oversight. He roused Russell, who stirred with a grunt, still half asleep. Together, they ascended the narrow, winding spiral staircase, each creak of metal echoing unnervingly in the oppressive silence. At the top, a scene of bizarre disruption greeted them. The gears designed to rotate the massive beacon were still churning, a frantic, futile dance. But the light itself remained stubbornly fixed. Something was jammed deep within the intricate mechanism, a large, dark piece of cloth, sodden and coated in a vile, slimy moss. It reeked of decaying seaweed, and something else, something cloying and sickly sweet. Confusion warred with a rising sense of dread. The door to the beacon room had been locked, the windows sealed tight against the elements. How could anything, let alone this putrid fabric, have found its way inside? They wrestled the foul material free, its slickness making it difficult to grip, and flung it out into the howling wind, watching it disappear into the night. It had to be a bizarre one-off, they reasoned. A fluke, a trick of the sea and the old lighthouse. They retreated to their beds, the strange odor lingering in Nate's nostrils. Thought the next night, the macabre repetition began. Just after 2 a.m., Nate awoke with the same heavy pre-storm sensation. His eyes shot to the window, and sure enough, the beacon was motionless. This time, a tremor of genuine fear ran through him. They hurried up the spiral stairs, their steps heavier with trepidation. The beacon room door, still locked from the inside, offered no clue, and yet, there it was again. Another piece of fabric jammed into the same precise spot. This one was different, though a smaller, frayed red shawl, soaked through with what looked and smelled unmistakably like seawater, even tiny crustaceans, clinging to its tattered edges. "This isn't a coincidence," Nate stated, his voice flat. Russell, his face pale in the faint light, could only nod. They meticulously checked every conceivable point of entry, doors, windows, even the seldom-used supply closet. Everything was secure. The horrifying realization dawned on them. Someone, or something, was not only getting in but was actively sabotaging the lighthouse, deliberately trying to extinguish its vital light. The isolation, once a predictable comfort, now felt like a suffocating trap. From that night forward, a ritual of desperate defense began. They barricaded the stairwell with heavy crates, transforming their sleeping quarters into a fortified sanctuary. The beacon room and the main entrance were locked with a new, almost frantic intensity. But the fortifications proved futile against the unseen. On the 7th night, Nate lay awake, listening to the incessant creaks and groans of the old lighthouse, trying to convince himself it was just the wind. Then, from across the room, he heard it, Russell whispering. His words were disjointed, nonsensical, as if conversing with an invisible presence in the corner. He's waiting, Russell murmured, his voice a reedy rasp. Nate leaned up, a jolt of ice water shooting through his veins. "Russell, what are you saying?" Russell blinked slowly, his eyes unfocused, a vacant confusion clouding them. "Saying anything? I wasn't saying anything." Nate's heart hammered against his ribs. He wanted to believe him, but the distinct whispers still echoed in his mind. Later that same night, Nate awoke again. Russell was gone from his bunk. He found him sitting at the window, staring intently down at the treacherous rocks below, illuminated sporadically by the struggling beacon. "I saw someone last night," Russell whispered, his voice thin, almost translucent, "standing there, on the rocks, just watching us. Then they disappeared when the light came back around." Nate's blood ran cold. The thought of another, the person on this isolated rock, unseen and unheard, was far more terrifying than any mechanical malfunction. From that moment, Russell's descent accelerated. He became a wraith, his eyes haunted, his movements sluggish. Sleep was a luxury he no longer indulged in. He spoke in fragmented sentences, muttering about noises in the wall and voices from the stairwell. Nate tried to reason with him, to pull him back from the precipice of his unraveling mind. But Russell was already slipping away, consumed by a dread that Nate could only dimly perceive. On the 9th night, the sounds began, not the familiar groans of the old structure, but distinct, slow, deliberate footsteps descending the metal stairs from the beacon room above. Clang, 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 each step resonated with a terrifying finality. Nate looked over at Russell, who was frozen at the foot of the stairs, his eyes wide with a terror that mirrored Nate's own. "Did you go up there?" Nate choked out, his voice barely a whisper. Russell, his face a mask of primal fear, shook his head violently. "No, did you?" Neither of them had moved from their beds. The footsteps stopped. The ensuing silence was heavier, more suffocating than any noise. It pressed in on them, a tangible presence. That night, they dragged a heavy dresser in front of their bedroom door, creating a makeshift barricade, and slept with their utility knives clutched tightly under their pillows, a futile defense against an invisible enemy. The 11th night brought the ultimate violation. They were jolted awake by the sudden, absolute silence of the beacon. Nate scrambled to his feet, his heart a frantic drum against his ribs. When they reached the top of the lighthouse, the beacon room door wasn't just unlocked or even ajar. It was wide open, flung back with an unimaginable force, as if a gale force wind had ripped through it. The actual wind howled through the open doorway, a mournful, mocking cry. But the real horror lay within. The beacon bulb, an industrial-grade behemoth that required considerable effort to remove, had been unscrewed and placed upright in the exact center of the room, a silent, defiant trophy. Nate stared at it, paralyzed by a terror that transcended anything he'd ever known. Russell, his eyes glazed over, just kept muttering, "Someone did it, someone did it." Then, a chilling sensation, Nate felt something cold brush against his back, a fleeting, icy touch that made his skin crawl. He spun around, his knife raised, but there was nothing there. Russell, however, had gone completely horrifyingly pale. He was pointing a trembling finger at the wall, his whispers barely audible. A hand came out of the bricks. The words were a breaking point. Nate didn't wait. He grabbed Russell, and they stumbled back down the spiral staircase, their legs like jelly, locking themselves once more in their bedroom. Nate spent the rest of the night rigid with fear, listening to every creak, every groan, every whisper of the wind, trying to discern the reality from the nightmare. Russell was a broken man, rocking back and forth in the corner, murmuring to an unseen entity, his sanity shattered. The next morning, as the first rays of dawn painted the sky a hesitant gray, Nate grabbed the emergency satellite phone. He had to get off this rock. He reported a serious mechanical failure and requested an immediate pickup. The Coast Guard vessel arrived that afternoon, a beacon of hope against the oppressive gray sea. As Nate and his still catatonic Russell were being helped aboard, the crew chief asked a question that made Nate's blood run cold. "Rough night, huh? We got your distress call at 2:12 a.m. Nate froze. He hadn't touched the phone until daylight. The deckhand elaborated, recounting a garbled call, static laced with a voice saying something about someone being there with them before it abruptly cut out. Russell remained silent throughout the entire ride back to shore, his eyes fixed on some distant, unseen horror. He quit the Coast Guard a few months later, never speaking of Matinicus Rock again. Nate, the pragmatic, grounded man, continued his maintenance duties, but one thing was certain: he would never return to Matinicus Rock. The place had left an indelible mark, a chilling testament to a malevolent presence that had sought to extinguish not just the light, but the very sanity of those trapped within its eerie embrace. He'd seen enough.